Treasurer Jim Chalmers outlines a budget surplus, big changes to Medicare, a bunch of cost of living initiatives, and good news on inflation in his first full budget last night. Commonwealth Bank makes $2.6 billion in just 3 months as it pulls back cashbacks in the home lending market. And McDonald's sales in Australia hit a record on the back of cups of coffee and home delivery. It's Wednesday, the 10th of May, 2023, the day after budget night. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Great show. From the very, very serious budget to the less than serious McCafe coffee.
I'm looking forward to that one. I'm actually quite surprised by that story, but we'll get into that one in a little bit. We've got a lot to get through before then, because of course it is. Do you call today it's like Boxing Day for the budget, isn't it?
Yeah. Boxing, more like hangover day for all those politicians and journalists working late into the night last night.
That's right. And I'll tell you someone who was working very late into the night last night and working hard this morning, Stephen Koukoulas, our resident economist. You've got an interview coming up with him straight after the show for his take on the budget.
Yes, Stephen he's worked in Treasury, he's worked for Prime Ministers, he has followed the markets for decades. He won't mind me saying that. So his take on the budget is always worth listening to. And I'll leave it up to him to say exactly what it was, but he makes some very, very interesting points. And I think all the news on the budget that's out today is really interesting, but it's going to keep coming out over the next few weeks and months. And I think that's something that Stephen's looking forward to too. Anyway, well worth listening to that chat with Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's pick through a few of the key points from last night's budget, Sean, because it is, of course, the main story this morning. We had Treasurer Jim Chalmers unveiling the first full budget for the government last night, and it was really based on 5 themes, wasn't it?
Yes. Front and centre, no doubt, was cost of living relief. Second, I reckon, was investing in Medicare and the care economy. Then there was breaking down the barriers of disadvantage, embracing clean energy and value-added industries. And finally, another big one, achieving a budget surplus this financial year and smaller deficits into the future.
Can I jump in, Sean? Quick question
Sure.
for you. What's a value-added industry?
Well, it's a very, very generic term, but it's basically, at the moment, we dig a lot of stuff out of the ground and we send it to somewhere else to value add. So they take our iron ore and they create steel. When you want value add, generally it's further up the value curve. So it's not just digging stuff and sending it elsewhere. It's actually adding value to some of those inputs.
40 seconds into this, and I've already learnt something. This is going to be a cracker. Please go on.
It might have peaked. It might have peaked.
No, don't talk yourself down, Sean. Teach me. Go for it.
Righto. Well, look, plenty of spending initiatives. $14.6 billion in cost of living support over the next 4 years. There's money for energy price relief. There's money for rental assistance, or more money for rental assistance, expanded income support for people out of work. There's a big $5.7 billion funding boost for Medicare. The big one in that is a tripling of the cost of bulk billing incentives for GPs. The idea behind that is that it will cost less for people to go and visit a doctor. In fact, hopefully it will be free in terms of it being bulk billed. There's money for household energy upgrades. There's plenty of little incentives in that one. Single parents will get higher welfare payments, and that will go on until their youngest child turns 14. The long-term unemployed over the age of 55 will receive higher job seeker payments. There's also a $40 a fortnight increase to the unemployment benefit, to youth allowance, and to Austudy. The budget bottom line for this financial year, quite incredible, a surplus of $4.2 billion. That's built on lower welfare payments and higher mining tax receipts. But it's a one-off surplus, with deficits of $13.9 billion in the 2024 financial year, then $35.1 billion. Commonwealth debt will rise to $1.1 trillion by June 2027. That's massive interest rate payments in that one. And there's really no forecast on budget surpluses beyond this year.
Sean, it's interesting. A lot of budget measures are obviously kind of leaked well in advance of budget night. And so we knew a lot of these measures, a lot of these bits and pieces were kind of widely discussed. And even kind of throughout the day yesterday, there was talk of the surprise surplus. The one thing that seemed to be a bit of a surprise last night was the Medicare boost for the bulk billing incentives.
Yeah. And it's fantastic because it's going to see a doctor should be a right in a sense. Everyone should have access to great medical care when you live in a country like Australia. And I think this will really help that. I hope there's enough money in rural and regional Australia. That might be a bit tricky, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Well, I tell you, it must have been a surprise because even our local GP clinic last week announced that bulk billing would be ending for children. So clearly, I reckon this will be taking a lot of people by surprise, and hopefully in a really good way. Make a bit of meaningful difference in terms of increasing access and accessibility of kind of GP services for families in particular.
I must say, there was plenty of spending on health, and I think that is very welcome, and certainly aged care workers receiving more money, and that where I was a bit disappointed, very little on mental health. And I think that is that is a growing crisis in Australia. There didn't seem to be a lot around that.
You're right. That is probably one of our biggest challenges at this time. Obviously, aside then from mental health, there was plenty of spending kind of broadly. What about the economic outlook?
Well, Federal Treasury expects the Australian economy to outperform all major advanced economies, though it does concede that the economy is slowing in response to the deteriorating global economy, higher inflation, and of course, much, much higher interest rates. Real economic growth is expected to slow to 1.5% next financial year before recovering. Inflation is past its peak, according to Treasury's forecasts, and will head towards 3.25% by the end of next financial year. That is a pretty good outcome, better than what the Reserve Bank thinks. In fact, the government's cost of living relief package, notably lower energy prices, will take about 0.75 percentage point off inflation, according to Treasury. The unemployment rate is likely to head back towards 4.25% over the next 12 months. That's the other one. Now, there was a warning from Jim Chalmers, though. Still a bunch of hard decisions to come, not least because the cost of the stage 3 tax cut has increased. And indeed, if you read the pundits this morning, the main criticism really is that he didn't do enough. Sort of the rivers of gold in commodity prices and lower welfare payments gave them an opportunity to do much more, and they didn't. Financial markets last night, well, they didn't really move much on the budget, to be perfectly honest, and that kind of suggests that most traders don't think it's going to mean a lot for interest rates.
Is it ever possible to satisfy everybody with a federal budget? There's always losers and there's always winners.
I remember sitting in the federal budget and lock up at times with really good economics and government writers, and they actually really liked the budget, but they just can't say that because, as a journalist, you sort of have to kind of find fault in it. And it's quite funny sometimes because, I don't know whether that happened last night at all, but there's always a reason to complain about it.
No, and look, there's plenty more that we can discuss because there is so much in this, obviously, but there's plenty of other news we need to get to as well. So stick around for the interview with Stephen Koukoulas, which is coming up after the show because there's plenty more analysis in that. And Stephen has a really interesting take on the whole budget. Sean, local markets, of course, closed kind of well before the budget yesterday. How did they perform?
Well, Michael, the S&P ASX 200 finished the day down 0.2% to 7,264 points. The markets fell early but then stabilised and pretty much fought their way back. It was a tough day for the real estate investment trusts. Charter Hall was the worst among the real estate stocks, falling 4%. Wasn't alone though. Stockland, Mirvac, Abacus Property Group, they all closed more than 2% lower. Best on the day were the financials and industrials. The four major banks started weaker, but all closed the session in the black. Macquarie Group was the standout, jumping more than 2%. The big miners, BHP, Fortescue Metals and Rio, were all lower, as were the energy companies, Woodside and Santos. The retailers tended to outperform, led by Coles, which was up a bit, and toll road giant Transurban jumped 0.5%.
What's going on in international markets?
Well, there were some pretty important numbers out of China yesterday. The world's second largest economy's trade surplus widened to $90 billion last month, above expectations and a great demonstration of the sustained global demand going on. However, and this isn't good news for Australia, imports fell unexpectedly for the seventh month due to weak demand in China and lower commodity markets. Of course, we export a lot to China, so when they are reducing imports, bad news for us. Otherwise, oil prices slipped a bit with investors still cautious about the outlook. Gold is higher this morning, trading around $2,030 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar has held on to recent gains. It's trading just under 68 US cents.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Australia's largest lender, the Commonwealth Bank, made a $2.6 billion profit for the first 3 months of the year, and boss Matt Comyn said that his organisation isn't responsible for the intense competition in the mortgage market.
The three other big banks, National Australia Bank, Westpac and ANZ, have all said that competition in retail banking is intense. We're talking about home loans, deposits, credit cards, that type of thing. Now, given Commonwealth Bank is the biggest, the inference is that it has been a major player in making it competitive. Comyn yesterday said the bank has to defend its market share, but it isn't responsible for driving the competition, which has hurt profit margins. In fact, yesterday, the bank said it was dumping its $2,000 cashback offering to borrowers. Now, keep in mind, competition might not be great news for investors, but it is good news for consumers wanting good deals. The result shows that Commonwealth Bank is keeping its market share in home lending and winning more customers in business lending. Its net interest margin, which wasn't actually disclosed, is estimated to have fallen only a touch over the quarter. Comyn said the economy was set to slow as higher interest rates bite, though the pickup in the population alongside higher commodity prices will buffer any downturn.
It's kind of a strange message to have to send, isn't it? In terms of saying that it's not us that's responsible for the competition in the mortgage market. As you say, that's a message directed towards investors and the other banks, but it's almost like saying to consumers, hey, we're not the competitive ones here. We're not the ones offering the best deals.
Yeah, it's a lot going on at the moment. And remember, ANZ is trying to buy Suncorp's business, and the bank's very keen, and ANZ particularly is very keen to show how much competition is in the market. And it is intensely competitive, no doubt about it. And Commonwealth Bank is a big player, but it's sort of walking that line between investors and customers.
Seems like a very good opportunity, actually, Sean, for me to plug our other podcast, How Do They Afford That? Because we've done a few episodes now on refinancing and kind of how to approach your bank looking for a better deal, how to go to another bank in order to get a better deal. So it's definitely worth checking out How Do They Afford That on your podcast platform, just basically wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll take any opportunity to squeeze a plug in that show.
You will. We'll be talking about your books shortly, I'm sure.
Well, actually, funnily enough, they've got very similar titles because the book is called How to Be Remembered and the podcast is called How Do They Afford That?
There it is. There's that plug.
And that book's available in basically anywhere you buy books. Anyway, Sean, enough about me. Retail sales fell during the first quarter of 2023, meaning turnover is down for the last 6 months, which will drag on economic growth.
It demonstrates pretty clearly that rising interest rates and the higher cost of living are curbing consumer spending. The Australian Bureau of Statistics yesterday said real retail sales, which take into account the impact of inflation, fell 0.6% in the March quarter to $96 billion. Now, outside the pandemic, this is the largest fall in retail sales volumes since the September quarter 2009. Significantly, the pace of price rises has slowed. A bit confusing that, but the prices just aren't increasing as quickly as they were. That's mostly due to discounts on clothing and other large household goods like furniture and electronics. These are the sort of numbers that show higher interest rates are biting, and the Reserve Bank won't be too upset to see them because it means monetary policy is working, which will take the heat out of inflation.
Sean, spare a thought for the Telstra engineers and actually all Telstra customers yesterday morning. It took 11 hours, but the telco eventually restored services to mobile customers hit with an Australia-wide outage yesterday.
Customers began reporting problems on Monday night, and the fault hit customers mostly in Queensland and New South Wales. Outages spiked just before 8 a.m. yesterday morning. Now, Telstra advised affected customers to turn airplane mode off and on to reset their connection or to make a data call using Wi-Fi. I know last night I was still trying to call people saying this number is not in service. And so eventually I would text them and say, can you do the turn your phone on and off? And it resets it. So I know it was only 12 hours at the outage, but the ramifications took a lot longer. Telstra did say that mobile data and calls to 000 were not affected. Mind you, still not quite sure what the problem was, Michael.
I just love that the solution was switch it on and off again.
That's right.
It feels like that's kind of common sense, right?
We at Fear and Greed, whenever there's a technical issue, we just turn it off and on. Tends to work.
Yeah, 99% of the time it fixes it.
Yep.
How about that?
Yep.
Now, Sean, yesterday was, of course, all about the budget, but there were a couple of other stories as well out of Canberra.
Indeed, there were. Now, opposition leader Peter Dutton yesterday called on the Chinese government to release Australian journalist Cheng Lei from disturbing detention and return her home. Dutton released a joint statement with Foreign Affairs opposition spokesperson Simon Birmingham, marking the 1,000th day since Ms. Cheng's detention. Another interesting one yesterday was Nationals Senator Matt Canavan. Not exactly a shrinking violet, that man. He paraded around a lump of coal in Parliament and at media appearances, saying that was the main reason for the surplus. Probably true. And finally, Mary Doyle, the winner of the recent Aston by-election in Melbourne, became the first politician yesterday, or at least the first politician in federal Parliament, to swear allegiance to King Charles III.
Hasn't the lump of coal in Parliament stunt already been done?
I think that was a Morrison stunt from memory.
It's a very famous image of him with the coal in Parliament, isn't it? Sean, how about this one? Fast food giant McDonald's annual sales in Australia hit a record $2 billion last year thanks to the growing popularity of its coffee and home delivery options.
The latest accounts show that since COVID impacted 2020, McDonald's has grown annual sales by $300 million, relying more on drive-through and digital traffic, according to a story in The Australian. The chain says 1 in every 4 coffees sold in Australia is from one of its McCafes. I think that's quite incredible. It sells an average of about 600,000 cups of coffee a day. Delivery now represents about 10% of total sales, while the world's largest restaurant chain's mobile app has about 1.8 million customer interactions a month. Pretty amazing. 600,000 cups of coffee a day.
I'm amazed at that. Look, I've become a bit of a snob. The only coffee I will drink now is my own.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, I've got to say, if I'm going to have a fast food coffee, it would actually be a McDonald's coffee, because I'm a total coffee snob and have been forever, and I have favourite coffee shops and places I'll never go in that. But often if you're travelling, particularly with kids, and about the only takeaway coffee I would drink is McDonald's. I actually think it's okay.
Oh.
There you go. Actually, another update, Michael. Did you see what happened to Jenny Craig's Australian New Zealand operations yesterday? Remember, it was late last week. They came out, and because the US operations went into bankruptcy, and the local operations came out and said that currently, I suppose that did say currently continue to operate and support our clients.
Big development yesterday.
5 days later, well, nope, they're folded. It kind of makes me angry to come out 5 days ago and say, yep, we're going to continue to operate, and then suddenly say, nope, it's all over.
It's a bit of a nervous time now for clients of Jenny Craig, because it's a pretty kind of popular business.
It's an iconic business. As we said, it started in Melbourne back in 1983, and it went on at one point to be a major player obviously in Australia, but in the US as well. Anyway, sadly, it's now folded. It's under private equity ownership. And I suppose they'll have to work their way through that.
Yeah, all right, we'll see what happens there. International news now, Sean, and Goldman Sachs has agreed to pay $215 million to end a long-running class action lawsuit that accused the Wall Street giant of systemically underpaying women.
The bank struck the deal with lawyers representing about 2,800 women who claimed the firm discriminated against them in pay and promotions, according to Bloomberg. About a third of the settlement is expected to be set aside for lawyers' fees. Still, that leaves a fair chunk of money. The trial, scheduled for next month in New York, would have provided a rare public forum for testimony about inequality inside the financial industry, where all but one of the 6 biggest US banks have only ever been run by men. The two sides have been completing a deal as Goldman raced to settle before trial. The company had previously said it was looking forward to vigorously defending itself against what it called baseless claims.
Now, Sean, I can't believe this next story that we are, in fact, still talking about this. This has been so many years, BMW now is the latest car manufacturer to upgrade its recall of vehicles with Takata airbags, telling owners to not drive the 90,000 affected sedans and SUVs until the defective equipment is replaced.
Yeah, and Honda and Ford have recently made similar do not drive orders. It's been going on for about 20 years, this story, literally. Now, of course, the airbags can explode if they're deployed after long-term exposure to high heat and humidity. The crisis triggered the largest recall in US history. It affected about 34 car brands. At least 25 deaths and more than 400 injuries in the US have been linked to the defect. Investigations into issues with the Japanese airbags actually began back in the early 2000s. Now, in 2017, the company pleaded guilty to criminal charges, agreed to pay a $1 billion fine. $850 million of that was set aside for automakers. That same year's Takata filed for bankruptcy, and recalls are still continuing. Incredible.
That is just extraordinary. All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with our resident economist today, our special budget edition, Stephen Koukoulas.
I thought he sounded very, very preppy, really, given the big day, sort of the big 24 hours he's had.
Yeah.
You know, he probably hasn't had much sleep, though.
No, but this is his Christmas. I mean,
true.
this is his time to shine.
Yep. True. Well, he tells us his take on the budget, particularly around the economic projections, surplus, that type of thing.
Yeah, he does a really good job of just kind of explaining what it all means. So it's definitely worth a listen. It's basically the best guide you will find to the budget. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And Sean, if you want something a little bit, I suppose, lighter, new episode of How Do They Afford That is out today.
Fantastic.
Second mention in one podcast.
Not bad.
Today's episode is all about saving money on clothes, would you believe?
Clothes.
That's right. Cost of living kind of obviously going up, and clothes is something that it's become more expensive. And if you've got a family, like the cost is just astronomical. And so Canna and I go through a whole heap of hacks and tips and ideas and things on how to basically cut your household clothing budget while still looking your best, Sean.
Of course. What's the difference between a hack and a tip?
They're very similar. They're spelt differently, but one is very modern. Hack is very modern. Tip is old school.
Okay.
So tips are for you, hacks are for me, Sean.
Righto. Fair enough.
All right, you can find How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts as well. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 10th of May, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and stay up to date on all the business news with Alexa and your Amazon Echo smart speaker. Simply say, Alexa, play the Fear and Greed podcast to catch the latest episode, and you can grab yours now at amazon.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.